This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
But social justice, not so much. This is Wretched Radio. Social justice, it is the hot topic du jour. It's also the hot topic of the day. Relatively recent concept, but recently it is becoming more and more popularized in conservative circles. A decade ago, 20 years ago, the ideas of men like Jim Wallace would have been totally rejected and shunned. Now, they're embraced. What has happened? How do we respond to Jim Wallace-like assertions that, for instance, the biblical Jubilee year of Leviticus 25 teaches economic redistribution, leveling the playing field, material wealth, to rectify the, quote, human tendency toward overaccumulation by some while others lose ground? Is Leviticus 25, the year of Jubilee, when land would return to the original owners, when debts would be wiped away, is that socialism? Is that what we're to be striving for? The answer is no, we're not. First of all, we're not Israel living in that time. But nevertheless, is it an illustration that God's desire is to level the playing field? This is from a lengthy presentation by Andrew S. Kulikovsky, Justice and the Bible. He's a B.Ap.Sc. Honors M.A. That's what he is right there. It was a paper presented at the Point Summit Conference responding to the assertion that the Jubilee year, it's all about socialism. It's a selective reading of what goes on in the Jubilee year. Firstly, the Jubilee year did not provide for the cancellation of debts. Normal circumstances, a person who was indebted to another and could not pay was forced to work for the person. That ain't getting your debt wiped clean. You had to pay for it through labor. A family member could redeem them before the Jubilee year, but they had to pay a price for doing so. The verses are Leviticus 25, 23 through 24, 47 through 54. So the person who owed the debt wouldn't necessarily lose anything at the time of the Jubilee, since they would have had the benefit of the debtor's free labor for a period of time. So you didn't steal from the person who owned it. You didn't take it from the rich. They got something for it. The debt was paid, not in dollars. We're just going to assume they used dollars in Israel
Shekels?
At that time. Shekels. They got labor. Secondly, the release of slaves related only to Israelites who possessed fellow Israelites as forced laborers as a result of unpaid debts. It didn't affect the possession of foreign slaves. So you can't say that this is some form of socialism, because those rules didn't apply to everyone. Third, the return of property affected only that property that lay outside the city walls. So it was agricultural land, not the land inside of the cities. And by the way, there was a reason for this. This was another one of God's brilliant ideas to keep families strong. If you remember, with an inheritance, the inheritance went to one. It typically went to the firstborn, whether it was in order the firstborn, but the one who was deemed the firstborn, they got the land, all of it. Why? Because if it were divided up among the children, and there were typically a lot of kids, it couldn't sustain itself. It wasn't enough for the whole family to survive. So one was given the land. It stayed in the family, and then the whole family worked it and thrived because of it. Brilliant. Same thing is true with the Jubilee. If the land is getting cut up, sold off, passed on, moved all over the place, no, it's going to return to the original landowner because it's good for the family. But that was only agricultural land. It didn't affect the land inside of the cities or other economic resources like fishing boats and livestock. Fourth reason the Jubilee year does not endorse socialism: Jubilee redistribution didn't always help all the poor. It provided nothing to immigrants who had no original inheritance. People born just after a Jubilee year would still have to suffer for almost 50 years of economic inequality and being poor. Many would die before the next Jubilee year. This is hardly an illustration. It's a selective reading of the Year of Jubilee used by people like Jim Wallace, the Sojourners, and social justice people inside of conservative evangelical circles. the Jubilee year would have had little effect and provide little immediate assistance to many of the poor. Number 5, the amount of economic leveling would be minimal, because knowledge of when the Jubilee year was due to occur would almost certainly affect the way trade and commerce was conducted. Okay, I want to buy that piece of land, and you want full price, and it's year 49, so that next year I have to return it to you. I'm not going to give you the full amount. We're going to prorate this thing. You don't think that happened? Of course it did. So with all due respect to those who would cite the Year of Jubilee, it does not endorse socialism. It should be noted that after the Israelites conquered the land of Canaan, the land was not divided up evenly between the tribes in the first instance. Do you remember the size of the land? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Okay, so Jacob is in Egypt. It's right around Genesis 48, neighborhood, maybe 40, not 48, when he gave the blessing to Joseph's sons, Esau and Manasseh. Esau born first, but he passed over Esau to give the bigger piece of parcel of land to Manasseh. He received Ephraim. What did I say? Esau.
Yeah.
Oops, Ephraim and Manasseh. Yeah. Different guy. Had something to do with a pot of stew and being really hairy. That's how much I remember my Bible. So Manasseh got 2 huge parcels. Benjamin received 1 small parcel, and the Levites were given none. Does that sound like social justice to you? Social justice people will cite Acts chapter 2, where everybody shared what they had in common. No, they gave as it was needed, out of the heart. It was not compulsory. One of the strongest refutations of the equating of justice and material redistribution can be found in the words of Jesus himself. Matthew 23 and Luke 11. Jesus points out the leaders who routinely gave away 1/10 of their produce, yet he scolds them because they neglected the more important matters of justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Wait a second. So they were given some of their money to help the poor, and Jesus said, that's not doing justice. Justice is something else. Justice is not redistribution of wealth. Justice is upholding the law, not material redistribution to the poor. That's not doing justice. Otherwise, Jesus wouldn't have chastised them for neglecting justice. He doesn't even stop there. He condemns them harshly because beneath their veneer of piousness, they were hypocrites. They were greedy, self-indulgent, and wicked. So you take somebody's money to give it to somebody else, and they've got a greedy, wicked heart. That's not what Jesus is after. That's not God's desire. Inner workings, that is what Jesus is after, not a forced outward compulsion. Now, all of these debates that we're having about taking care of the poor, it makes people sound like, well, don't you care for the poor? Of course we care for the poor. Of course, no. Nobody cares for the poor more than Christians. I'm not aware of any group that does more for the poor than for Christians. We have grace and compassion to the needy. We forgive debts. We do. We aid them in useful endeavors, but not because we are commanded to give a certain percentage or to only have so much, but because of the compassion that God has shown to us. That's what motivates it. Now, how we go about doing that, it's got to be played out individually, by choice, not by coercion. God doesn't deal with all of us the same way. We deal with different people in different ways. I mean, right? Okay, Tony, how tall are you? Just say it. Just go ahead and say it.
5'6".
How tall are you? How much?
5'6".
How tall? 5'6". Joey, how tall are you?
6'1".
And I'm 6'4". God didn't distribute height equally, did he? I don't think we really need to ask the question, like, who's the best looking amongst us? God doesn't distribute looks. He doesn't distribute money. He doesn't distribute circumstance. He doesn't distribute your inheritance the same way. God is okay with inequality because that is not what he is after. He is after the inner man. He differentiates. He gives different blessings to different people. So he is not even one who practices socialism. God deals differently with us through circumstances, where you were born, the gifts that you have, the physical abilities. And so we see that God doesn't even practice socialism. And neither should we. And as this conversation continues to happen inside of the conservative church, get ready, because Bible verses, they will be misused and abused a lot. All we need to do is dive in, study them to refute them, but keep our focus on what God is after. God is far less interested in redistribution of equal outcome. He doesn't even practice that himself. And if we're going to be like God, we should allow different circumstances, different people to have different amounts and different values, because to take one to give to another, there's a word for that the Bible uses. It happens to be a commandment. It's called stealing. And it can be practiced not just by a criminal, but by the government too. This is Wretched Radio.
Wretched. We're hip. We're technologically savvy. Would you please join us in liking, subscribing, or sharing this video?